Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to another episode on Talk Architecture Podcast. And I'm your host, Naziati Muhammad Yaqub. And I would like to welcome architect Eleena Jamil, who is here with me. This is a special podcast, an interview on leadership roles for women architects. Hi, Eleena.
Hello, Naziati.
I'd like to read your bio for an introduction here. Um, Eleena Jamil is a Malaysian architect born in Penang. She graduated from the Welsh School of Architecture, Cardiff University in the UK. She joined the Cardiff Architecture faculty as a teaching assistant while completing her MPhil and PhD postgraduate research. Her PhD thesis, titled Rethinking Modernism, the Sugden House and the Mother's House, examined the concept of ordinariness and vernacular imagery as alternatives to the reductive limitations of modern architecture. She established her eponymous architectural practice in Kuala Lumpur in 2005, focusing on developing buildings within the context of Malaysia and Southeast Asia. Recently, she published a book entitled An Essence of Place: Making Local Architecture, which emphasizes the importance of routing projects to a place or place by way of exploring the experiential potential of form, material, and construction, and a concern for the environmental, social, and economic aspects of sustainability. And that's what we know of you, someone who explores vernacular traditions and the materials. We notice the bamboo buildings that you have done, and then you have gone on since to look into other vernacular forms, is it? But that's not what we're going to talk about today, are we? So, what would you like to say? Add anything to the introduction, or you would like to go ahead with our questions for the day?
I'm quite happy to go ahead with the questions.
Okay, thank
I
you.
think that's a lovely reading of my bio there.
Oh, thank you.
Thank
That's
you.
very, very nice of you to say that. Now, okay, I've already made an introduction somewhat recently on this topic and starting a series on leadership roles for women architects. And the first interviews I'm going to do is with those who are more famous than others, the popular ones, the ones with the most experience and having success in these times. And there are a few lineups, and you're the first one that I will be publishing. Eleena, thank you so much. So this will be valuable to mid-level women architects out there, both local and overseas, I'm sure. So we're talking about gender roles, in our society, and of course in the architecture profession as well, that this could be an issue. So I would like to start with whether you face in your line of work, whether you have ever faced resistance or bias when stepping into the leadership roles in architecture. Well, okay, before we go into that, maybe you could look into some broader points regarding what do you need, what are the challenges that you had, which was crucial to get to where you are um, in positions of being a leader, because people do follow you, you see, in some sort of influencer in architecture, but the mentor, sorry, the word is mentorship. So what are those crucial things that happened? And because that resistance is kind of like negative, but maybe you could put how you would like to say on this matter.
Yeah, I think starting from the beginning, I started my practice about 20 years ago. So I've been in practice running my own studio for many years now. I think at the beginning, I started off on my own. working from home, working on one single project, which is a house. And I think that at that time, when you were starting out, I might be, well, I would say I'm quite confident to say that I was not very confident in the direction or confident in kind of leading a project, because the architect is seen as a leader in a project. So it took a few years of doing a few projects before I would say that I see myself as leading my studio. The first few years working from home, especially, and I think I've had comments where one of my sub-consultants said that, "Oh, you're working from home. It looks like it's a hobby to you." He said something like that to me. So I thought that's a bit strange to say something like that to me, because I was very serious about my work. I was just starting out. And then also working from home had its limitations. I think one of the neighbors was not happy that I have my office at home. So that led me to moving to a proper commercial space. And then we had more projects coming in, and I had more experience. And that's when I become perhaps more confident in asserting myself or putting myself out there and tell them, right, I am leading this project, and we can work together very well with me in this role. So it's not, I think, starting out for anyone really, and I don't know whether it only applies to women, but I think it applies to all young architects, that when you first start out, there might be if you start out young, you might have some issues about confidence and about assertiveness, and that builds up as you go along, as you persevere, and you gain more experience. But maybe it's a little bit harder as a woman leading your own studio to begin with, because some people, might see you not being in this leadership role, and that takes years to kind of build that confidence.
So, what are these leadership roles? Well, you mentioned about, or I did read as well about confidence as being a vital factor, and here you echoed it as well, and assertiveness. So it took a few years before you gained that confidence and have that assertiveness. So is that all it is you have to be more experienced, or is there other sort of resistance that you need to shall we say, you know how it is when you suddenly have to go and sort it out there and then, okay, is there something like in the nature of a person that is resilient that we need to have?
Yeah.
And you did mention that women find it a bit harder in leadership roles. Is it the normal cultural upbringing that they are supposed to take the back seat when it comes to leading in the construction industry, for example? What do you think?
I mean, I think we live in Malaysia, I practice in Malaysia, where there is a culture of women working. I mean, my grandmother worked, my mother worked, and I've studied for a long time. I did my degrees and my PhD, and there was no question of whether I should be working or not while raising my children and having a family. And I think it comes down to personality as well. I think for a very long time, right from the beginning, while I was studying, I was very interested in doing my own thing, running my own studio, because that was a clear vision I had from the beginning. And I came back to Malaysia in year 2000. And then I worked for Hijaz Kasturi, and I worked under Serena Hijaz, which I see as a female role model. So I didn't feel that it was being a female architect is something very extraordinary at the time. So after I've gained enough experience to fill in my logbooks, to get my Part 3 exam through, I immediately started my own studio on my own. And it doesn't matter where, I have very little work then. But I think it does come down to what you want to do. The measure of success for a female leader can be different. It doesn't mean that everybody has to do what I do to be a successful female practitioner in architecture. There are different ways you can be a good, successful academic, maybe like yourself. You can be, a successful artist, graphic artist. You can write papers. So there are different ways of being assertive and being a leader in your role. And I think as a woman, you need to find what really drives you and what you really are interested in order to excel. And if you find something that you're passionate about, I think immediately you would become very confident and assertive in this field that you have chosen to be in.
I'm sure there is you come up with challenges in the day-to-day situations with regard to, shall we say, in the context of working in a large-scale project, for example, involving many male consultants and clients and contractors. Do you face anything that you feel like, oh, hang on a minute, this is unfair, or why is that person thinking that like that of me, or or if you hear stories or you have come across where there is a doubt with regard to the gender, specific to the gender. Now, this is something that a lot of mid-level women architects would like to know. Maybe they are facing these things. Like you said, that the success is measured in different ways, and they are trying to traditionally work in a company and working in this situation. This is the first question is, have you ever faced the discrimination? And did you if you did not really face this, do you know about this? And is it more to do with being younger and inexperienced, or more to be what context usually this sort of challenge occurs? Excuse me.
I feel my experience with discrimination is perhaps a little bit more nuanced, and they're not direct. I do feel that when I was working in a larger project, when I was working for someone else, of course, not running my own studio, we do small projects here. When I was working on larger projects, and I think the first few meetings I had with clients and contractors, I could sense that they had some doubts on my ability to do my work. And that's just a feeling. You know how intuitively you have a feeling that, people don't really, people have doubts about your abilities.
Feelings, yeah.
And I think it took a while. It took a while of getting to know me. And I do try very hard before going to meetings, doing all my homework, knowing exactly what needs to be done, knowing my drawings very well, knowing what the issues are, identifying them early before I start my interaction with people. I think that's important. I don't know whether, I think being a woman might be a little bit more difficult when you are in that situation compared to a male architect. But of course, if you are young, you're quite young and inexperienced, you face that problem as well. And someone once told me that people start listening to you when you're 40 and above.
Mm.
And then they stop listening to you when you're 60 and above.
But that's a different story. That's about age.
That's a different story altogether, of course.
Not listening when you're 40.
Yeah. Someone told me that. And I actually believe that.
That's because maybe because you're much more clear in your communication with
Perhaps,
people. Because
yes.
you've come to that skill level of how to communicate. So I have a list of questions here. We still have the time for the first part where we're trying to like tease out what are the issues that could be go deeper into later in the second part. So you have answered many of the questions that the mid-level women architects express. And you've given some advice, which you'll be going into deeper if they are struggling. So I know that our topic also applies to non-women, which is the male, as well. I'm sure they find this interesting as well. But is there something in a woman that makes being an architect better? This could be one of those. Maybe there is some cultural characteristics or personality of a woman that could make it that could bring something to a successful team or teamwork or the bearing on a project, you'd think. That could be interesting, isn't it?
Yes, it is an interesting thing because I run a small firm, but we employ male and female architects in my studio. But I have to say, we employ more female architects here. Currently, it's 5 female architects to 1 male designer. Okay. And I don't intentionally go out and, get female architects to work for me. It just happens. Maybe more female architects apply to work for me. I noticed that. Maybe because I'm a female-led practice. But I like working with women. I have no issue, or I don't see any difference in terms of efficiency or diligence between a male and female. In fact, I find that female architects are more careful in their work. They're quite diligent in checking, make sure that everything is, everything works and everything is in place. Of course, there are issues about some, of my staff, my previous staff had family and all that, they had children. So my office works in a way where we don't work after 6 o'clock. We hardly ever work after 6 p.m.
Yeah.
Mainly because I have a family myself. When I used to work in larger firms, there is a culture that to work, late into the night, come in at weekends. But I wasn't very happy with that kind of culture. In fact, I was miserable. I didn't see much of my son growing up at that time when he was very small. So when I started my studio, I vowed that, we will not have that culture here, and we will try to focus our work 9 to 5, because everybody needs to come in on time in the morning, and you can, focus your work during the 8 hours in the office, then leave at 6. And so that worked out really, really well for all of us here so far. Occasionally, once once every few months we might have to work weekends, but that's about it. So maybe it works for me having more female architects than male architects because I'm quite flexible. As long as you deliver your work and deliver your work to a good degree, to a good standard, and that would work for me. And we also continue working from home a day a week.
All right.
COVID times. So that worked out well for us. We save on travel, carbon footprint is slightly smaller. So yeah, I mean, I do think I work well with female architects. I have to say, I have no qualms, no problems whatsoever. And you have to make room for different roles of women. Women are also caregivers. They're also mothers.
Different roles, yeah.
Different roles in life. And that comes down to this idea of maternity leave and paternity leave. I think in Malaysia we should have this a more set paternity leave for the men as well, so that the responsibility of caring for a new baby is shared between men and women, so that there's less discrimination towards a female employee. I think that is one way of kind of trying to overcome this problem of some employers seeing women as a burden in a way, especially when they are at that age where they start to have families.
That's very interesting. We'll go into that in more detail in our second part later. And you are starting to give the philosophy of how the employers who are in an architecture company would need to set out a much more balanced deal with the well-being and the work-life balance of taking the responsibility of your employees' work-life balance. And so this is interesting, and we shall go into that later in part 2. Thank you very much, Eleena. We shall meet again in part 2.
Thank you.
Okay.